everybody, and welcome to a Tatter-a-fact here at the Girlz Inc. studio in Las Vegas. Thank you for joining me today. It's just me today, and I am going to be talking about pigments. I think a lot of you are well aware that there's been a lot of changes with pigments in the last few months. Really, it goes back to the last couple of years, like behind the scenes, last couple of years with Europe, and Europe making some new decisions on some new ingredients, substances, and colorants that they are going to, and did in fact, add to the banned list, meaning that pigment manufacturers can no longer use these ingredients and colorants if they're manufacturing pigments within Europe or importing pigments to Europe. And so this affected probably most pigment companies. I mean, it certainly affected LI Pigments. You know, we import a lot of pigments all over Europe, and we have lots of distributors in Europe. So and there's been a lot of questions on Facebook, a lot of confusion. We've gotten a lot of emails and messages, and some of these questions pertaining on the new changes and the fact that pigment manufacturers have had to reformulate. Those questions have led to questions on CI numbers and lots of different things. So that's what I wanted to talk about in this podcast, and just clarify some things and try to simplify it so you can understand it. I'm certainly not a chemist, and my mind doesn't work like a chemist. You know, that's a very special mind, the mind of a chemist. So when I'm talking to Mattia and Darlene and Ella, Blanca and everybody at LI, they have to explain it to me, some things a few different ways for my mind to grasp it, absorb it, understand it in such a way that I can then go off and explain it and teach it to others. So let's talk about Europe. So Europe has governing agencies that regulate and test pigments, right? I think everybody is pretty well aware of that. Here in the US, we do not have any agencies that govern our pigments, test our pigments, have any guidelines or any restrictions or anything like that. The only time the FDA gets involved is if there's a complaint, if there's an outbreak with a particular color from a particular brand, then the FDA will get involved. So the FDA only gets involved if there's a problem. Other than that, they don't get involved. So here in the United States, did you know this, Olivia? I think you might have known this, but here in the United States, who knows what the hell is in our pigments if the U.S. manufacturer is not complying, takes it upon themselves to comply with EU, send all their pigments over to a testing lab in Europe, and have their pigments tested and ultimately pass. And can you imagine?
No, that's really scary.
Yeah, I mean, there could be car paint. There could be all kinds of things, carcinogenic, colorants, and who knows what's in there. So, and I think it's important for pigment manufacturers to be accountable. As not just an artist. I mean, I've tattooed over 20,000 procedures, and me personally, and I know most people, share my feelings. I want to know what's in my pigments. I care what I'm putting into people, and I get permanent makeup myself. My mother gets it. You guys get it here. My wife gets it. So I care deeply what's put into pigments and what I'm ultimately implanting into people. And I think most people do, but I think some people, especially maybe newbies, they don't really think about it.
Yeah, they're trusting the pigment line.
Yeah, they're just trusting the pigment line, and they're too new in the industry to, maybe to, understand that not all, what goes into a pigment's the testing. Not all pigment manufacturers do test and do comply with the EU guidelines, and when you know better, you do better. I think, hopefully this will, educate a lot of people and open up their eyes and their minds if this is information that they didn't know prior.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's good information. I think, some of us live organic, right? We eat organic, like I eat pretty clean, and I don't, really go to fast food restaurants. I don't eat a lot of processed foods. I make sure that, I get a lot of, vegetables in me daily. And, I eat clean because it's important to me what I put in my body food-wise. And so that just follows through, over to, pigments. All right, so let's talk about that. So over in Europe, it's called, and probably people have seen this, called EU RECEP 2008-1. And what that is, it's the gold standard of safety established by ECHA for Europe. ECHA is one of two governing agencies that oversee the safety of pigments for both PMU and the body tattoo industry. So ECHA stands for, it's ECHA, and ECHA stands for the European Chemicals Agency. And what it does is it legislates for the safe use of chemicals and substances, and it identifies substances, chemicals, ingredients, colorants that are unsafe in all different kinds of products, not just pigments. Today we're going to talk about pigments, but in all kinds of products. And then it submits its, findings to other agencies that will then, enforce, those recommendations or not enforce those recommendations. So the second branch of government over in Europe that pairs with ECHA is called REACH, REACH. And that stands for Registration, Evaluation, Authorization, and Restriction of Chemicals. And pigment manufacturers or manufacturers of any product over in Europe must comply with REACH if you manufacture or import pigments or products into the EU. So you've got ECHA and you've got REACH. Those are the two governing agencies over there in Europe, the main governing agencies in Europe overseeing pigments. And ECHA, over the last several years, has identified over 4,000 substances, chemicals, ingredients, and colorants that are now either banned from being used in pigments, or the amount is restricted to certain limits. And a bunch more ingredients, substances, and colorants were just added to that list and went into effect January this year. I think it was January 2nd of this year, 2022. So a lot of, or quite a few of the new ingredients and colorants that just got added to that banned list, not allowed in pigments anymore, were some commonly used ingredients and colorants. And it did cause a little bit of an uproar in the manufacturing sector of pigments in both PMU and body tattooing. One ingredient in particular was isopropyl alcohol. That has been used in pigment manufacturing, both PMU and body tattooing, for God knows how many years, 40, 50 years, not long, if not longer. And that is now no longer allowed, according to the EU. It is a banned substance. And then, of course, there was a whole list of commonly used colorants like red 210, yellow 65 that are now banned, and a whole host of other ingredients and colorants that are now banned. And you can find this list of newly banned ingredients online, and what we'll do is we'll post the link to that on this podcast, so everybody can kind of go on there and just check it out for themselves. So LI, we make pigments. We have pigments here in the US, Canada, and we're in over 65 countries. So we're all over Europe, and we ended up having, of course, isopropyl alcohol that is now on the banned ingredient list. And we had one particular yellow colorant, only one. We were pretty lucky that we only had one colorant that is now banned. And if you're familiar with LI, you know that LI for the last 25, 30 years has sent every pigment in every formula over to Germany, to the CTL, for testing. And we do that every 2 years to keep up with the testing. Because, as we have just witnessed, new ingredients and colorants get added to the banned list. So in order to keep up with pure pigments, producing pigments that don't contain any banned colorants, you've got to do your testing every 2 years. That's what's recommended by EU. And LI does that. And we've been doing it for years and years and years and years. So we had to reformulate. In order for our pigments to be distributed in Europe and shipped into Europe, we had to reformulate. We had to pull out the isopropyl alcohol and replace it. We did with ethanol alcohol. And we had to replace that one particular yellow. And we did. And so now all our pigments, no banned colorants, no banned ingredients, none. They all pass testing over in Europe. Now, the interesting thing is we didn't have to do that for the US, for Canada, for South Africa, Australia, and all the countries that we ship pigments to that are outside the EU. We didn't have to reformulate. We didn't have to pull out that banned yellow. We didn't have to replace the isopropyl alcohol. And keep in mind, ethanol is like 3 or 4 times more expensive than isopropyl alcohol. And it's always super expensive for a manufacturer to remove ingredients, replace ingredients, because we got to retest. We got to make sure, that everything, the new ingredients, are working well. Better than well, actually. And that's super expensive and it's super time consuming. So we didn't have to do that for any other country outside the US. But, after having long, I think it was one discussion with LI quickly, without even really having to think about it, made the decision to pull the banned ingredients, not just from the formulas being sold into Europe, but from the pigment line as a whole. And that made perfect sense to me. And I agreed with that immediately. And the reason, why is I remember Darlene saying to me, look, if Europe holds the gold standard, right? That's a high standard of safety, human health and safety when it comes to pigments. And if Europe deems these ingredients unsafe or too high risk for, allergic reactions or this, that, and the other, and we reformulate for Europe, why wouldn't we carry that high standard of safety to all countries, for all our artists, for clients all over the world that are being tattooed by an LI pigment, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Agree.
Yeah.
It didn't make a lick of sense for us to follow that high standard of safety for Europe, but not follow that high safety standard of safety for the world as a whole, for every country. So we did that, and that was a huge hit for LI. Man, that really brought LI to their knees, and it was a lot of work. I mean, for months and months and months, they were working 7 days a week, and super stressed out, and because we don't just reformulate and put it out in the market and hope that when you use it, it works properly. It implants good and it heals good. I mean, we test this stuff. It has to be tested on human skin. It just has to be. So, and that's where I come into the picture. I gather like a ton of testers all over the place, and we send out the samples and we get the feedback, and sometimes they're perfect, right out of the lab, no adjustments needed. And then sometimes, there's little tweaks and adjustments that we need to make. We make new samples, send them out again. And that's just how LI rolls. And I just wouldn't have it any other way. So because of all this, there's been a lot of talk, like on Facebook and in groups. And of course, we've been getting a lot of emails on the reformulation of the pigments. And so that's exactly why we had to reformulate some of the colors. So like I said, we only had one yellow that was in some of the loaded colors, and it was in one of the queen colors. And so we had to reformulate those colors in those particular lines. And when it came to aqua and velvet, there were we didn't use that particular yellow in aqua or velvet, so we didn't have to reformulate the colors per se, but we did have to pull out the isopropyl alcohol. And when we replaced it with ethanol, we found, thank goodness, there was no change in implantation, in saturation, in healing, or in anything like that. So that was good news.